Hello and welcome to Words and Bubbles. Okay, so the title of this video tells you that I want to talk about what I consider to be Wonder Woman's greatest and probably most brutal fight. And I will, but I can't just start with the fight itself, because every good comic book battle has some build-up. This one certainly does, and if I leave all of that out, I'd be shortchanging you. So what is that build-up? At the start of Tom King's run as the writer of Wonder Woman, there's an incident in a pool hall where a 6'4" Amazon named Emily gets into a fight with the bar's patrons. It's a whole lot more serious than that last sentence makes it seem though, because Emily kills all of the patrons but for two. 19 men dead. The two who are left are women. Emily then flees. So she's obviously wanted by the authorities, but more than that, the incident, I'll keep calling it the incident for the sake of simplicity, but remember, 19 dead. The incident has sparked a diplomatic crisis between the US and the Amazons, the result of which is that Congress passes the Amazon Safety Act, which bans all Amazons from the US until it's decided how much of a threat they pose. They form an organization called the Amazon Extraction Entity, AXE for short, to enforce the act, and put Sergeant Steele in charge of it. If you don't know Sarge Steele, he's been a lot of things over his long career. A detective, a spy, a good guy, a bad. Lately he's functioned primarily as a generic government heavy. He was Amanda Waller's second in charge during the Absolute Power storyline, which happened soon after the fight this video is about. The only thing that really separates him from other government heavy types is that he has a robotic prosthetic left hand. So it's not surprising that he's heavy-handed when exiling the Amazons. Sorry, very bad pun. I'm not typically fond of puns, but this one was right there. And he is heavy-handed, separating the Amazons from their families, shooting them when they don't come quietly. He even tries to have Wonder Woman shot when she chooses to investigate the incident rather than leave. Of course this doesn't go his way, and she easily defeats the soldiers he brought with him. She also crushes his metal hand, partly to get him to stop his attack, but mostly just to teach him a lesson. It's about then that we learn who the main villain of the story is, the Sovereign. He's a villain king created specially for the storyline. Let me clarify, Tom King, the writer of the story, created him. This clarification is necessary because the Sovereign is a villain and a king. He's the secret king of America. Sorry about that pun wasn't intentional. Regardless, the Sovereign's family has ruled the United States from the shadows for generations, ever since one of his ancestors took part in the slaying of tribes of women in Virginia and found a magic lasso. Okay, I'm going to say lasso here. I'm not American, so I would typically say lasso, but the lasso of truth just sounds stupid. Okay, so a black lasso, the lasso of lies. One can only assume that those tribes of women were related to the Amazons, but as far as I can remember, this is never actually stated. As for the lasso, as the opposite of Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, this one has the power to make others believe the wielder's lies when they are both touching it. Using this ability, the ancestor, a young lord at the time, accumulated great political power, which his heirs have consolidated, so that now even the President of America swears fealty to the Sovereign. Okay, so because Wonder Woman is an obstacle to getting rid of the Amazons, and because she represents truth, which is a threat to someone whose family built their kingdom on lies, and because she also represents change, which doesn't suit an old man with antiquated ideas, and because she's a woman and he's a chauvinist, the Sovereign goes after her. Not directly, of course. As I said, he said Sarge Steele and a few well-trained soldiers before. That didn't work, so this time he sends Steele with a whole battalion. I'm not exactly sure how big this battalion is, but it has tanks and other armored vehicles, fighter jets and attack helicopters, heavy artillery and lots of infantry. She defeats them all. It's a pretty big epic fight in its own right, but it's not the one the title of the video refers to, because despite the army's might, Wonder Woman crushes them pretty easily, all things considered. Almost as easily as she crushed Steele's hand the first time he went after her. So this might have been a good time for the Sovereign to cut his losses, but he's stubborn but not stupid. So, the next time he goes after her, he doesn't use brute force. Instead, he tries something more subtle, something insidious. He gets one of the Marines who made up the battalion, a young, good-natured man named Private Delgado, to believe that their loss to Wonder Woman was devastating to him personally and undermined his manhood. So much so that this lie drives Delgado to take his own life, after leaving a note saying that it was Wonder Woman's fault. This has the effect of turning many against Wonder Woman, which doesn't deter her as much as one might think. I suppose when you're used to aliens and supervillains wanting to kill you, people not liking you is something you take in your stride. So the Sovereign needs to try something else. He's back to using force, but he realizes that sending Sarge Steele to confront her with even more soldiers probably won't work. What he needs is superpowered help. A lot of superpowered help. A whole team. So that's what he gathered. First up is Doris Zule, Giganta. Now, even compared to most comic book villains, Giganta has a complicated history. When she first appeared in the 1940s, she was presented as a super-strong gorilla who was transformed into a super-strong red-headed woman by a professor named Tool. She was pretty big at the time, dwarfing Wonder Woman, but wasn't really gigantic. Anyway, her origin story has gone through a number of changes over the years, so now she was never a gorilla. Instead, she was a brilliant scientist who tried to cure her rare blood disease. This cure gave her the ability to grow hundreds of feet tall whenever she wants to. With her increased size, her strength and durability also increases. And even when she's normal size, she's pretty strong. So when she's a giantess, she's strong enough to go up against Wonder Woman, something she has done many times over the years. As an aside, I've got to say, and I admit that this is nothing more than a personal preference, but I think that the move to Giganta being a scientist instead of a gorilla is probably a good one. I mean, I know that one could now argue that she's just another scientist turned supervillain. And yes, I suppose that's true. But I still think that a generic supervillain is better than a transformed gorilla supervillain. Anyway, she's now in prison, and she's all too eager to try and kill her old foe again. Next up is Circe, a sorceress from Greek mythology, who is probably most famous for transforming most of Odysseus' crew into pigs when they visit her island in the Odyssey. I suppose this representation is fairly close to how she's represented in DC's lore, where she's a thousands-of-year-old enchantress, who has a habit of transforming people into animal hybrids she can then control. Besides from this ability, she can do all the other things you'd imagine a god-level sorceress can do. She can teleport, stop time, fly, fire magic bolts, change her own shape, open portals, control the earth, use magic to shield herself, and do just about whatever else the writers want her to. I've always thought of her as a bit like Wonder Woman's version of Loki. Like Thor, Wonder Woman is the ultimate warrior, a paragon of strength and courage. Like Loki, Circe is a trickster who counters the hero's brute strength with cunning and magic. I realize this isn't a perfect comparison. For one thing, Loki is Thor's brother, while, despite their long history, Circe isn't related to Wonder Woman. For another, Thor has another foe, the Enchantress, who I would guess many would see as analogous to Circe. And if you are one of those many, I'd agree that you had a point, but I still think that Wonder Woman and Circe have a deeper bond than that shared by Thor and the Enchantress. Also, seduction typically plays a greater role in Enchantress's plans. I'm getting off topic here, so let me return to who else the Sovereign gathers to help him defeat Wonder Woman. Dr. Psycho, who I suppose would be pretty intimidating if you were ever to meet him, because he's an incredibly powerful telekinetic and telepath, and because he suffers from scary mental disorders. Psycho is right there in his name. But ever since watching him in the Harley Quinn series, all I can think of when seeing him is a shorter version of Buster from Arrested Development, because Tony Hale, who portrayed Buster, does his voice as well. Someone still properly intimidating is Grail, Darkseid's daughter. Where Sarge Steele approaches the others on this list, the Sovereign himself approaches her, because she's a god and deserves to be shown the proper respect. Silver Swan is next. Like Giganta and Dr. Psycho, the Silver Swan has been portrayed in various ways over the decades. The most recent version, the one we are concerned with here, was a teenager named Natasha who dreamt of becoming a professional ballerina. Those dreams were shattered when she was a bystander to a battle between Wonder Woman and a villain known as Major Disaster, during which a building fell on Vanessa. Wonder Woman stayed with her while she was being taken to the hospital and then visited her often, but the news from the doctors was not good. Vanessa was told she would never walk again. Okay, so this whole thing is obviously pretty traumatic, and that could be the reason why Vanessa made more of Wonder Woman's visits than they actually were. She started to imagine that she was the Amazon princess's best friend. If that were the end of the story, it would have been bad enough, but it wasn't. Doctors approached Vanessa and said there was an experimental procedure they could perform which might help her. They could inject nanobots into her blood, and these nanobots could help her walk again. She agreed to the procedure, and it did help. She learned to walk. But there were consequences she hadn't foreseen. The first was that Wonder Woman stopped visiting. More tragedy happened for Vanessa when her mother died. Then Vanessa saw TV footage of Wonder Woman being around other victims and acting in the same way she had around her. This convinced Vanessa that she had never been special to Wonder Woman. On top of all this, the nanobots were starting to exert control over Vanessa, something like Dr. Octopus's arms did in the second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man film. All of this caused a mental split in Vanessa, and she developed a second personality, the Silver Swan, who was much more unstable and malevolent than Vanessa had been. This second personality then used the nanites within her to grow metallic wings and claws. The nanobots also increased her strength and durability, and gave her a scream that could tear concrete apart. The Silver Swan used these abilities to kill her doctors and flee the hospital. And then she went after those other victims, the ones she had seen on TV with Wonder Woman. And she killed them too. Okay, so Wonder Woman defeated her after that, and they have gone up against each other since. But that has remained the gist of her character. She's a super strong archangel, with a volatile love-hate relationship with Wonder Woman. As for Wonder Woman, she probably pities Silver Swan more than anything, regretting the part she played in Vanessa's transformation. Last up is Angelo Bend, the Angle Man, a Wonder Woman villain who made his debut in the 1950s, when gimmick villains were all the rage. He started as a not particularly good thief who was obsessed with angles, and incorporated unbeatable angles into his crimes. As another side note, these unbeatable angles often turned out to be very beatable, so that version of the character wouldn't do much good in the Sovereign's team, but over the years the character and his powers have grown. For a start, he gained the Angler, which is a device in the shape of a Penrose triangle, which allows him to warp both time and space. So time manipulation and teleportation are his go-to powers, but he can also alter reality itself. Later it was decided that Angelo was a master thief, rather than the inept one he had been, and it was revealed that he was one of Vandal Savage's children, which adds a bit to his street cred. This story furthers that development. It now seems that Angelo got his powers when he discovered the missing math that completes the anti-life equation, and that this discovery drove him insane. I'm not sure how this revelation connects to the angular device. I assume that it's some sort of physical manifestation of this missing section of the equation. But that's pure conjecture. What isn't is that the Angleman is now not only insane, but insanely powerful. So that's it. With the exception of Cheetah and Ares, a grouping of just about every major Wonder Woman foe, assembled by her newest foe, the King of America, for the express purpose of dealing with her. The question then becomes, how do they go about doing that? How do they combine their strengths? Strengths that have driven Wonder Woman to her limits in the past. How do they combine them into something greater? What plan do they use that they hope will see Wonder Woman's limits exceeded? First, they set up an ambush. The place they choose for this ambush is the National Mall in Washington, D.C., near to the Washington Monument. The lure they use to get her there is a simple one. At least it's simple to understand. A meeting with a man Wonder Woman has always loved, Steve Trevor. Arranging such a meeting is infinitely more complex, because Steve is a good and capable man who is fiercely loyal to Wonder Woman, and so who wouldn't betray her. And Wonder Woman would undoubtedly see through any foe meeting. So yes, arranging it is difficult, but it's not impossible when you have someone who can make people see what he wants them to, who can make people hear what he wants them to. who can make them believe what he wants them to. In other words, when you have Dr. Psycho working for you. But even his powers on their own aren't enough to get the job done. Steve Trevor is strong-willed. He's had extensive training, and, most importantly, he's constructed barriers in his mind to protect himself from psychic attacks. That's just the sort of thing you do when you're good and capable and dating Wonder Woman. So Dr. Psycho can't control him by himself. But he isn't by himself, and Angleman helps, twisting reality just enough so that Steve calls Diana and then meets her. And then the trap is sprung. Giganta's hands, already gigantic, burst from the ground and descend towards Wonder Woman. It turns out she's been lying in wait, fully grown, under the ground. She managed to do this with the aid of Circe's spells. The surprise the attack offered, having been deemed valuable enough to have the witch act from behind the scenes and sit out the actual fight. As for Steve, the strain of subconsciously fighting Dr. Psycho's attack has knocked him unconscious, so Wonder Woman is on her own. She gets Steve to safety, while the rest of Giganta erupts from the earth. Diana then transforms from her civilian clothing into her Wonder Woman costume, and the fight is on. Giganta punches out at Wonder Woman several times, but no matter how strong she isn't a match for the Amazon's speed and agility, and so Diana dodges every time. In reply, Wonder Woman manages to wrap her lasso around the giantess's neck, and is about to use her great strength, and, I assume, her ability to fly and to carry great weight while flying, to haul the immense woman over her shoulder and bring her crashing down to the ground. Before she accomplishes this feat, however, Silver Swan comes flying out of nowhere and smashes Diana into the Washington Monument. The two then struggle against each other. Silver Swan, her mind still fractured, alternating the whole time between pleading with Wonder Woman that they should flee together and threatening her. We learn that despite her power and the brutality of her attack, those are not the reasons the Sovereign wanted her on his team, because he knew Wonder Woman could withstand both. The reason he wanted her was that he knew how complex Diana's relationship was with her, and that the guilt and pity that she felt for her would be enough to distract our hero. And he was right. Giganta's giant fist flies through the air, and finally she lands a blow, sending both her enemy and her ally to the ground. It's clear that the blow has injured Diana, but unlike the Silver Swan, she's still conscious. In this moment, her own well-being isn't at the forefront of her thoughts. Neither is the battle she's in. What is the condition of Silver Swan, Vanessa, someone who was once her friend, someone she still thinks can be redeemed. These thoughts, together with the psychic machinations of Dr. Psycho, aided by the Angleman, are enough to keep her locked in place for one of the most visceral attacks I can remember coming out of a comic book. Giganta, her strength bolstered by Circe's magic, breaks the Washington Monument off at its base, and then brings the whole thing down on Wonder Woman's head, while the Amazon makes no move to protect herself, and instead uses her body to protect the Silver Swan. It's a bit like in wrestling, when they used to use folded chairs to smack their opponents on the back, before the move was pretty much stopped for being too dangerous. Except this isn't a folded chair. It's an 80,000-ton monument, and it landed on Wonder Woman's head, not her back. And this fight, at least within the story, is real. Okay, I have a little issue here, and this is me nitpicking. But in the book, the Sovereign says that the Washington Monument that Giganta ripped from its podium is 80,000 tons of molded marble. First thing is, only the facing is made of marble. Most of the construction is granite. Second thing, while the weight of over 80,000 tons is sometimes quoted for this monument, that includes its foundations. That part above the ground is only about 45,000 tons. I say only. Obviously 45,000 tons is still a lot. Lastly, molded marble makes it sound like the monument is solid. It isn't. There are stairs and an elevator and whatnot inside. So it's probably better to think of it as a windowless building rather than a solid monolith. I admit that all these little things could be different in the DC universe, but they're probably not. Not that I think this detracts too much from this blow that Giganta delivers. At 550 feet tall, the Washington Monument is still beyond huge. And 45,000 tons. To put that into perspective, Marvel has always been much more forthcoming than DC in saying how strong their heroes are. And the highest category for strength they typically give is that a character is able to lift over 100 tons. Now one could argue that characters like the Hulk and Thor, who have this level of strength, could conceivably lift as much weight as this, because over 100 tons includes 45,000. To me that's a stretch, but I'm not going to argue the point. What I will say is that the next highest strength rating Marvel gives is the ability to lift 75 to 100 tons. Characters with this strength include the Thing, Odin and Colossus, so some pretty heavy hitters. It would take 450 of these guys, on a good day, 450 Things or Colossuses, to do what Giganta did with some help from Cersei. And amazingly, this still isn't enough to put Wonder Woman down. Now I've seen some other heroes survive similar assaults. The example that stuck with me is one that I read as a kid in some Superman collection or another. In it, Superman survived a nuclear attack from Warworld. The reason I remember it is that the missile was the size of a skyscraper. This assault on Wonder Woman isn't quite so extreme, but it'll be just as memorable, I think. Because the Washington Monument is real, I have a better idea of what it landing on someone would be than I did of the devastation an entirely fictional warhead could do. Back to the fight. It doesn't knock out Wonder Woman. However, strange as it seems, this attack does put a number of her foes down for the count. The effort of helping Giganta lift the monument is enough to put Cersei to sleep, and the exertion of holding Wonder Woman in place, of facing her will, if only for an instant, is enough to knock out both Dr. Psycho and the Angleman. Giganta is still standing, but barely. It's clear she's drained. So when Wonder Woman lifts the monument, remember that's something it would take 450 Ben Grimms to do, and sends it back. Giganta is in no position to dodge it. It connects squarely with her and knocks her unconscious. Wonder Woman is bleeding, but the bad guys are down, and somehow she just saved the Silver Swan. So you might think that the fight's over. That's not the case, it's just getting good. Because there is someone else on the Sovereign's team, Grail, who not only has Darkseid as a father, but an Amazon assassin as a mother. So she's half god and half Amazon. Remind you of anyone? She was even born at the same time as Diana. And these bloodlines have granted her similar powers to Wonder Woman's. With one notable exception. She can shoot Omega beams from her eyes, similar to what her father can do with his Omega effect. These beams are so potent that, in the past, they have disintegrated Superwoman, an evil counterpart of Wonder Woman from a parallel universe. Also, like Wonder Woman, Grail seems to have spent most of her youth training, learning how to fight, so she's definitely not someone Diana could ever take lightly. Certainly not someone she could take lightly when she's just had 45,000 tons of granite and steel and marble crash down upon her. Grail tosses her weapon when she sees that Wonder Woman is unarmed. Then they face off. Then the fight begins. It's a fight that the comic book says has slipped into myth, and from the images shown, I can believe that it would have. Because these punches, that they both take and receive, are mighty, like those thrown by Superman or the Martian Manhunter or whoever. But somehow they're not as abstract as the punches thrown by alien heroes. Those punches, as often as not, are given light years from Earth, amongst the stars. Even when they happen closer to Earth, it's typically in the sky, high above Metropolis or Gotham. This fight is more grounded, more rooted in the world we know, or, at a minimum, a world we can better understand. It's more a Punisher fight than a Superman one, even though both contestants can bend steel and shatter rocks with their fists. Like the participants, the fight itself has a dual nature. It's got one foot planted in the godlike and another planted in the earthly. It's got knees to the ribs with 1,000 times the power needed to defeat any normal man. It's got elbows to the face delivered at such speed that no human eyes could see them. It's got punches that would fell any hero not plucked from myth. But these two just go on. At the start, Grail has the upper hand, not surprising when you consider what Wonder Woman has just gone through. But still, she fights, she endures, and after an hour, a very punishing hour, they both seem to be on pretty even footing. They have both now suffered so much physical trauma that the condition they were in at the start doesn't matter all that much. When they are both in a daze, and neither can go on for long, Grail lifts her scythe, ready to deliver the coup de grace. It seems, to her, fair play has its place, but that place isn't in victory's stead. But her blow doesn't land. Wonder Woman blocks it, using one of her bracelets of submission as a shield. She then uses the last of her strength to deliver a bit of a coup de grace herself, a Herculean punch right in the middle of Grail's face that drops the evil demigod at Wonder Woman's feet. Having done that, having won, Wonder Woman collapses. She simply has no more to give. And that's where the battle ends, with both warriors on the floor. The battle, but not the war with the Sovereign. That still goes on for a long time. There's him capturing her. She's unconscious, so that wasn't as difficult as it could have been. There's her escaping. Him getting his revenge for that escape. There's a lot more too. More little twists and turns, but also major plot lines. I won't go into any of that here, because that's not what I wanted to talk about. If it were, this video would have been twice as long. 3 times. It also would have needed to have come out sometime next year, or later, as Tom King isn't finished telling his story. So that's enough for now, I think. So goodbye, and I hope to see you next time.